Rachel Perry stood in the endless checkout line at the grocery store, her arms aching from the weight of two overflowing shopping baskets. The fluorescent lights above buzzed quietly, casting a harsh glow on her tired face. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, on the day before Thanksgiving, and the store was packed with people rushing to get their last-minute items. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to ease the pressure on her lower back. Around her, other shoppers chatted excitedly about their holiday plans, their voices filled with warmth and anticipation. Rachel felt none of that warmth. She felt only exhaustion. The line moved forward slowly, one person at a time. Rachel glanced down at her baskets: a 22-pound turkey, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, green beans, pumpkin pie ingredients, dinner rolls, everything Jeffrey had demanded she buy for the Thanksgiving dinner that would be held at her apartment. Not their apartment, her apartment. The two-bedroom place in the center of town that had belonged to her grandmother, Helen Duncan, and had been left to Rachel when Helen passed away 3 years ago. The apartment that was legally hers alone, kept separate from the marriage by inheritance law. The apartment that Jeffrey and his mother, Charlotte, treated as if it were their own personal property. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, and the memory of her grandmother's voice came to her clearly, as it often did in moments like these. Never lower your head to anyone, sweetheart. A woman who respects herself keeps her head held high, no matter what comes. Helen had said those words so many times throughout Rachel's childhood. Helen Duncan had been a widow who raised her granddaughter alone after Rachel's parents died in a car accident when Rachel was only 6 years old. Helen had been strong, independent, wise. She had taught Rachel to be the same, or at least, she had tried. Rachel opened her eyes and looked at the woman ahead of her in line, who was laughing with the cashier about something. The sound felt foreign to Rachel. When was the last time she had laughed like that? Freely, without worry, without fear of saying the wrong thing or being criticized for enjoying herself too much? 5 years. It had been 5 years since she married Jeffrey Perry. 5 years since she had felt truly free. Rachel had met Jeffrey when she was 33 years old. At that point, she had been teaching elementary school for nearly a decade. She loved her students, loved watching their faces light up when they finally understood a difficult concept, loved the way they trusted her completely. But outside of work, her life had felt empty. Most of her friends from college had gotten married years earlier. They had children now, busy lives filled with soccer games and birthday parties. Rachel had attended so many weddings in her 20s that she had lost count. And every time someone would ask her, "So, Rachel, when are you going to find someone?" with that particular tone of voice that suggested she was somehow failing at life by being single. By 33, she had started to accept that maybe marriage was not in her future. Maybe she would be like her grandmother, living alone, finding fulfillment in other ways. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was starting to seem like the life she would have. And then Jeffrey walked into the coffee shop where she was grading papers one Saturday morning in October. He was tall, handsome, with dark hair just starting to show hints of gray at the temples. He wore a nice suit, carried himself with confidence. When he accidentally bumped into her table and almost knocked over her coffee, he apologized profusely, insisted on buying her a new one, and then asked if he could sit down and talk to her for a few minutes to make up for his clumsiness. Rachel remembered that morning so clearly, the way the autumn sunlight came through the window and made everything look golden, the way Jeffrey smiled at her, really looked at her, as if she were the most interesting person in the room. He told her he was a construction manager, that he had just finished overseeing a major project downtown, that he loved his work, but sometimes wished he had someone to share his success with. He asked about her job, listened attentively when she talked about her students, laughed at her stories. When he asked for her phone number at the end of their conversation, Rachel felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. The courtship had been wonderful. Jeffrey took her to nice restaurants, sent her flowers at school, called her every evening just to hear about her day. He met her grandmother Helen, who was 79 at the time, and he was respectful, charming, attentive. Helen had seemed to approve of him, though Rachel remembered now that her grandmother had said something strange one evening after Jeffrey left. "He is very polished, sweetheart. Very smooth. Just make sure you see what is underneath all that polish before you make any big decisions." Rachel had brushed off the comment at the time. She thought her grandmother was just being overprotective, cautious, because she did not want to see Rachel get hurt. Now, standing in this grocery store line 5 years later, Rachel understood exactly what Helen had meant. Jeffrey proposed after they had been dating for 18 months. It was a romantic proposal at a beautiful restaurant overlooking the water, with a ring that must have cost more than Rachel made in 2 months of teaching. She said yes without hesitation. They were married 4 months later, when Rachel was 35 years old. The wedding was small but elegant. Helen was there, beaming with happiness, though Rachel noticed her grandmother looked more tired than usual, more frail. The change in Jeffrey did not happen immediately. It was gradual, so gradual that Rachel sometimes wondered if she had imagined the kind, attentive man she had dated. The criticism started small, a comment about how she had overcooked the chicken, a suggestion that she should wear her hair down instead of up because it looked better. A joke about how she should go to the gym more often, said with a laugh, but with an edge that made Rachel feel ashamed of her body. Then the comments became more frequent, more cutting. "Why do you always burn the toast? Can you not do something as simple as making breakfast? You spent how much on groceries? What are you, stupid with money? My mother would never serve dinner this late. She has everything on the table by 6 o'clock sharp." And then came the names. Pig, useless, idiot, snake, worthless. The first time Jeffrey called her a pig, Rachel was so shocked that she actually laughed, thinking it must be some kind of terrible joke. But Jeffrey had not been joking. He had been furious because she forgot to pick up his dry cleaning, and he called her a lazy, useless pig who could not even remember simple tasks. Rachel should have left then. She knew that now. But she did not leave. She told herself it was just stress from his job. He was working long hours, dealing with difficult clients. He did not mean it. He would apologize later. And sometimes he did apologize, in his own way. He would buy her flowers, take her out to dinner, be sweet for a few days. And Rachel would think, "See, he is still the man I married. The other stuff is just temporary." But it was not temporary. It got worse. And then there was Charlotte, Jeffrey's mother, 68 years old, with perfectly styled gray hair and a permanent expression of disapproval on her face. Charlotte had a key to Rachel's apartment. Jeffrey had insisted on giving his mother a copy in case of emergencies. But Charlotte did not use the key for emergencies. She used it to show up unannounced, walking in as if she owned the place, criticizing everything she saw. "This apartment is so small. I do not know why you two did not buy a proper house. Rachel, you really should clean more often. Look at this dust on the bookshelf. You call this a meal? This is what you are feeding my son?" Charlotte would run her finger along surfaces looking for dust, open Rachel's refrigerator without asking, rearrange things in the kitchen because this is not the right way to organize cabinets. And Jeffrey never defended Rachel. Not once. If Rachel tried to set boundaries with Charlotte, Jeffrey would get angry at her. "That is my mother. Show some respect." If Charlotte insulted Rachel right in front of Jeffrey, he would either laugh along with his mother or pretend he had not heard. Sometimes he would even join in. "Mom is right, Rachel. You really should keep the place cleaner. It is embarrassing when she visits." The line moved forward again. Rachel was now third from the front. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and her stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. She knew who it was before she even looked. She pulled out her phone and saw Jeffrey's name on the screen. She answered. "Where are you, you useless pig? Come home right now and make dinner for my family." Jeffrey's voice exploded through the phone, loud enough that the woman in front of Rachel turned around and looked at her with wide eyes. Rachel felt her face burn with humiliation. People in the nearby lines were glancing over, some with curiosity, others with pity. She could feel their judgment, their discomfort at witnessing this private moment of degradation made public. "I am at the grocery store," Rachel said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady, "getting everything for tomorrow. I do not care where you are. I told you to be home by 2 o'clock. It is almost 3. My mother is already here, and there is nothing to eat. You had 2 simple jobs today. Buy the turkey and the groceries, and get home. And you cannot even do that right. What kind of useless woman did I marry?" Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but Jeffrey had already hung up. The dial tone hummed in her ear. She slowly lowered the phone and stood there, frozen, as the line moved forward without her. The woman who had been in front of her was now checking out, and the cashier was looking at Rachel expectantly, waiting for her to move forward. But Rachel did not move forward. She stood there, holding her 2 heavy baskets, feeling the weight of 5 years pressing down on her shoulders, 5 years of insults, 5 years of humiliation, 5 years of being treated like a servant in her own home, in the apartment her beloved grandmother had left to her. And then, in that moment, standing in the middle of a crowded grocery store on the day before Thanksgiving, Rachel heard her grandmother's voice again, clearer than it had ever been. "Never lower your head to anyone. A woman who respects herself keeps her head held high, no matter what comes." Something inside Rachel cracked open. Or maybe it did not crack open. Maybe it had been breaking slowly for 5 years, piece by piece, and this was simply the moment when the last piece finally shattered. She looked down at the baskets in her hands. The turkey, the sweet potatoes, the cranberry sauce, all of it for Jeffrey's family. All of it for a Thanksgiving dinner where she would cook for hours, serve everyone, clean up alone, and then be criticized for every single thing she had made. Rachel set the baskets down on the floor, right there in the middle of the aisle. The cashier called out, "Ma'am, are you ready to check out?" But Rachel was already walking away. She walked past the checkout lanes, past the customer service desk, past the automatic doors that slid open with a quiet whoosh. She walked out into the parking lot, into the cold November air, and she kept walking toward her car with empty hands, but with her head held high for the first time in 5 years. She got into her car, started the engine, and drove home. Not to Jeffrey's home, to her home, the apartment that had belonged to Helen Duncan, the apartment where Rachel's grandmother had taught her to be strong, to be independent, to never accept less than she deserved. As Rachel drove through the afternoon traffic, past houses decorated with autumn wreaths and families carrying grocery bags filled with Thanksgiving preparations, she felt something stirring inside her that she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten what it felt like. Courage. When Rachel pulled into the parking space in front of her apartment building, she sat in the car for a moment, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. She could see the light on in her second-floor apartment window. Jeffrey was up there. Charlotte was up there. They were waiting for her to come home with bags full of food, ready to apologize for being late, ready to cook and serve and clean and accept whatever insults they threw at her. But Rachel was done apologizing. She was done accepting. She took a deep breath, grabbed her purse, and got out of the car. As she walked toward the building entrance, she felt her grandmother's presence beside her, the way she used to feel it when she was a little girl, and Helen would hold her hand crossing the street. "I am with you, sweetheart," she could almost hear Helen saying. "Keep your head up. You are stronger than you know." Rachel climbed the stairs to the second floor, walked down the hallway to her apartment door, and put her key in the lock. She could hear voices inside, loud voices. Jeffrey was talking to someone, probably his mother. Rachel turned the key, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as she had left it that morning, except now it was filled with people who did not belong there. Jeffrey was standing in the middle of the living room, his face red with anger. Charlotte was sitting on the couch with her feet propped up on Rachel's coffee table, the coffee table that had been Helen's, looking at Rachel with that familiar expression of disdain. And there was someone else there, too. Someone Rachel had not expected to see. Jeffrey's younger brother, Michael, was sitting in the armchair with his wife and their 2 young children, all of them looking uncomfortable and out of place. Jeffrey's eyes locked onto Rachel the moment she walked in. "Where is the food?" he demanded. "Where is everything for tomorrow?" Rachel closed the door behind her quietly. She set her purse down on the small table by the entrance. She looked at Jeffrey, then at Charlotte, then at Michael and his family. And then she lifted her head, squared her shoulders, and said the words that would change everything. "I left it at the store." The silence that followed Rachel's words was absolute. It was the kind of silence that seems to stretch time itself, making every second feel like an hour. Jeffrey stared at her as if she had just spoken in a foreign language that he could not comprehend. Charlotte's mouth fell open slightly, her perfectly painted lips forming a small circle of shock. Michael shifted uncomfortably in the armchair, and his wife reached over to take the hand of their older child, a girl of about 7, as if sensing that something significant was about to happen. "You what?" Jeffrey's voice was low, dangerous. Rachel recognized that tone. It was the tone he used right before he exploded into a rage, the tone that usually made her stomach twist with fear and sent her scrambling to apologize, to fix whatever she had done wrong, to make everything okay again before his anger escalated further. But this time, Rachel did not feel that familiar twist of fear. Or rather, she did feel it, but she felt something else too, something stronger, something that had been buried under 5 years of abuse, but was now rising to the surface, like a person who had been held underwater, finally breaking through to air. "I left it at the store," Rachel repeated, her voice steady and clear. "I left the turkey, the sweet potatoes, the cranberry sauce, the dinner rolls, all of it. I walked out and came home." Jeffrey took a step toward her, his fists clenched at his sides. "Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea how much food we need for tomorrow? My entire family is coming here for Thanksgiving dinner. What are we supposed to serve them? Nothing?" Charlotte stood up from the couch, her face flushed with indignation. "I knew it," she said, her voice sharp and cold. "I told you, Jeffrey, that this woman was unreliable. I told you from the beginning that she was not good enough for you. And now look at what she has done. She has ruined Thanksgiving for the entire family." Rachel looked at her mother-in-law, really looked at her for the first time in years. Charlotte Perry was a woman who had spent her entire life believing that her opinions mattered more than anyone else's, that her comfort and desires should always come first, that she had the right to invade other people's spaces and criticize other people's lives simply because she thought she knew better. For 5 years, Rachel had tried to please this woman. She had cooked Charlotte's favorite meals, cleaned the apartment to Charlotte's impossible standards, listened to Charlotte's endless criticism without defending herself. And it had never been enough. It would never be enough because Charlotte did not want a daughter-in-law. She wanted a servant. "I did not ruin Thanksgiving," Rachel said calmly, looking directly at Charlotte. "You ruined it. You and Jeffrey. You have been ruining things for 5 years." Charlotte gasped, as if she had been physically struck. "How dare you speak to me that way? Jeffrey, are you going to let her talk to your mother like this?" Jeffrey moved closer to Rachel, his face now inches from hers. Rachel could smell the coffee on his breath, could see the vein pulsing in his temple that always appeared when he was furious. "Apologize to my mother right now," he said through gritted teeth. "Apologize, and then get in the car and go back to that store and buy everything we need for tomorrow." Rachel did not move. She did not flinch. She looked into Jeffrey's eyes, the eyes that had once looked at her with what she thought was love, and she saw clearly now what had always been there, but what she had refused to see: control, contempt, a complete lack of respect for her as a human being. "No," Rachel said simply. The word hung in the air like a bell that had been rung, its sound clear and final. Jeffrey's eyes widened in disbelief. In 5 years of marriage, Rachel had never said no to him. She had complied, compromised, apologized, bent herself into whatever shape he demanded. But she had never refused him directly. "What did you just say to me?" Jeffrey's voice was barely above a whisper now, which somehow made it more menacing than when he yelled, "I said no!" Rachel felt her grandmother's strength flowing through her, felt Helen Duncan standing right beside her in spirit, encouraging her, supporting her. "I am not apologizing to your mother. I am not going back to the store. And there will be no Thanksgiving dinner here tomorrow." "You have lost your mind," Jeffrey said, shaking his head slowly. "You have completely lost your mind." "No," Rachel replied. "I think I have just found it again." Charlotte stepped forward, inserting herself between Rachel and Jeffrey. "Listen to me, you ungrateful woman," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with venom. "My son took pity on you. You were 33 years old, practically an old maid, with no prospects, teaching little brats for barely enough money to live on. He gave you everything: a husband, a family, a purpose. And this is how you repay him? By throwing a tantrum like a child because he asked you to do one simple thing?" Rachel felt something hot and fierce rise up in her chest. For 5 years, she had swallowed her words, bitten her tongue, accepted every insult and criticism in silence. But she was done being silent. "Your son did not give me anything," Rachel said, her voice rising for the first time. "This apartment? It is mine. My grandmother left it to me. It was never Jeffrey's, and it certainly is not yours. Even though you walk in here anytime you want with that key you should never have been given. My job, I had that long before I met Jeffrey, and I am good at it. I make a difference in those children's lives every single day. And as for having no prospects, I was fine on my own. I did not need to be rescued. I made the mistake of thinking Jeffrey loved me, but all he wanted was someone he could control, someone he could treat like a servant, someone who would put up with his mother's constant interference and criticism. "How dare you!" Charlotte shrieked. "Jeffrey, do something! Are you just going to stand there and let her insult us like this?" But Jeffrey was not looking at his mother. He was staring at Rachel with an expression she had never seen before. It was not anger, exactly. It was something closer to shock, as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time and realizing that she was not the person he thought she was, or maybe realizing that she was exactly the person she had always been, and he had simply managed to beat that person down so thoroughly that he had forgotten she existed. "Rachel," Jeffrey said, and his tone had changed. It was softer now, almost reasonable. Rachel recognized this tone too. It was the tone he used after he had been particularly cruel, the tone that came with flowers and apologies and promises that things would be different. "Sweetheart, I think you are overreacting. I know I can be harsh sometimes, and I am sorry about that. And Mom, maybe you should apologize too. Maybe we have both been a little too critical lately, but that is no reason to blow up our entire Thanksgiving. Let us all just calm down, and you can go back to the store, and we will have a nice holiday together. Okay?" Rachel almost laughed. After everything, after 5 years of emotional abuse, after the phone call in the grocery store, where he called her a useless pig in front of strangers, after walking into her own apartment to find his entire family waiting to be served by her, he thought an insincere apology would fix everything. He thought she would fall for the same manipulation that had worked for 5 years. "Wash your mouth before you speak about me," Rachel said, her voice cold and clear. "The only useless person in this apartment is your mother, who is sitting on my couch with her feet on my coffee table as if she owns the place." Charlotte looked down at her feet, still propped on the coffee table, as if only now realizing what she was doing. Her face turned bright red, and she quickly pulled her feet down. "Jeffrey!" she gasped. "Did you hear what she just said to me? And the only pig in this apartment is you, Jeffrey," Rachel continued, feeling a strange sense of liberation with every word that came out of her mouth. "A man who does not even have the courage to clean himself up properly. Your underwear is always filthy because you cannot be bothered to do your own laundry, and you expect me to wash it for you like I am your maid." Michael made a small choking sound from the armchair. His wife covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Their children sat very still, sensing the adult tension in the room, even if they did not fully understand what was happening. Jeffrey's face went from red to almost purple. He took another step toward Rachel, his hands balling into fists again. For a moment, Rachel felt genuine fear. She had never seen him this angry before. She had pushed him further than she had ever pushed him, and she did not know what he would do. "That is it," Jeffrey said, his voice shaking with rage. "You have gone too far. You do not talk to me that way. You do not talk to my mother that way. I have put up with your laziness, your incompetence, your constant whining for 5 years, but I will not put up with disrespect." He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the fear threatening to overwhelm her courage, threatening to send her back into the old patterns of apologizing, backing down, making herself small. But then she felt it again. Her grandmother's presence, Helen Duncan's strength, and Rachel lifted her chin, looked Jeffrey directly in the eyes, and said the words she should have said years ago. "Go ahead. Take one more step. Put one finger on me, and I promise you will spend the rest of your life behind bars." Jeffrey froze. His hand, which had been raised slightly as if he were about to grab her arm, stopped in midair. He stared at Rachel, and she could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that she meant it, that she would call the police, that she would press charges, that his perfect image as a successful construction manager would be destroyed if he were arrested for domestic violence. "Jeffrey!" "Stop!" Charlotte's voice cut through the tension. For the first time since Rachel had known her, Charlotte sounded genuinely frightened. "Stop right now. Do not do anything stupid." Jeffrey lowered his hand slowly. He stood there, breathing hard, his jaw clenched so tight that Rachel could see the muscles working in his face, but he did not touch her. He did not come any closer. Rachel felt a surge of power unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had stood up to him. She had threatened him with consequences, and he had backed down. All these years, she had been so afraid of his anger, so convinced that she had no power in this relationship. But she did have power. She had always had power. She had just been too afraid to use it. "Get out!" Rachel said, her voice ringing clear through the apartment. "All of you! Take your things and get out of my apartment right now." Charlotte stood up from the couch, smoothing down her expensive wool skirt. "Well," she said, trying to regain her composure and her dignity, "I can see that we are not welcome here. Come on, Michael. Gather your family. We are leaving." Michael stood up quickly, clearly relieved to have an excuse to exit this uncomfortable situation. His wife gathered their children, both of whom looked confused and upset, and they headed toward the door. Michael paused as he passed Rachel, and for just a moment she thought she saw something in his eyes. Sympathy, maybe, or understanding, but he did not say anything. He just nodded slightly and ushered his family out the door. Charlotte walked past Rachel without looking at her, her head held high in indignation. "This is disgraceful," she muttered as she passed. "Absolutely disgraceful. Jeffrey, are you coming?" But Jeffrey did not move. He stood in the middle of the living room staring at Rachel with an expression she could not quite read. Anger, yes, but also confusion and something else. Fear, maybe, or loss. "If your mother is not spending Thanksgiving here, then neither am I." Jeffrey finally said, his voice flat and hard. "I am not staying in the same place as someone who has no respect, who has no gratitude for everything I have done for her." "Then leave," Rachel said simply. "Go to your mother's house. I am sure she will be happy to have you." Jeffrey's mouth opened and closed a few times, as if he could not quite believe what was happening. Rachel could see it on his face. He had expected her to break down. He had expected her to apologize, to beg him to stay, to cry and plead and promise to be better. He had no script for this version of Rachel, the one who stood tall and ordered him out of her apartment without a single tear, without a single word of regret. "You are going to regret this," Jeffrey said, grabbing his jacket from the coat rack by the door. "You are going to wake up tomorrow all alone in this apartment, and you are going to realize what a huge mistake you just made. And when you call me, begging me to come back, I am not going to answer." "Good," Rachel replied. "Do not answer. In fact, do not call me at all. Close the door when you leave." Jeffrey stared at her for one more long moment, and Rachel met his gaze without flinching. Finally he turned and walked out the door, slamming it so hard that the pictures on the wall rattled. And then Rachel was alone, completely alone in the apartment that had belonged to her grandmother, the apartment that was now truly hers again. She stood in the silence for a moment, listening to her own breathing, feeling her heart gradually slow down from its frantic pace. Her hands were shaking. Her legs felt weak. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was starting to fade, leaving behind a strange mixture of relief and fear. What had she just done? She had thrown out her husband and his entire family on the day before Thanksgiving. She had insulted them, refused to apologize, stood her ground in a way she had never done before. And now she was alone, with no food in the house, no plans for tomorrow, no idea what would happen next. Rachel walked slowly to the couch and sat down in the exact spot where Charlotte had been sitting moments before. She looked around the apartment, seeing it with fresh eyes. The bookshelf filled with the novels her grandmother had loved, the old photographs on the walls showing Rachel as a child with Helen, both of them smiling. The kitchen where Helen had taught Rachel to bake cookies, where they had spent countless afternoons cooking together while Helen told stories about her own life. This apartment held so many memories, so much love, and for 5 years, Rachel had let Jeffrey and Charlotte treat it like it meant nothing. Rachel felt tears building behind her eyes, and for a moment she tried to push them back, the way she always did. But then she thought, why? Why should she not cry? She was alone now. No one was here to criticize her for being too emotional, too sensitive, too weak. She let the tears come, let them roll down her cheeks freely. But they were not tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of release. 5 years of holding everything in, and now it was finally pouring out. She cried for several minutes, sitting on the couch in the quiet apartment, letting herself feel everything she had suppressed for so long. And then, gradually, the tears stopped. Rachel wiped her face with the back of her hand and took a deep, shuddering breath. She felt empty, but it was not a bad emptiness. It was more like she had been carrying an enormous weight for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. And now that the weight was gone, she felt almost weightless herself. Rachel's stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since breakfast, and it was now well past dinner time. She walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. There was not much inside. Some milk, a few eggs, half a loaf of bread, leftover Chinese takeout from 3 days ago that Jeffrey had ordered, but then refused to eat because he said it was too spicy. Rachel looked at that takeout container for a long moment. Jeffrey hated Chinese food. He said it was greasy and tasteless, and why would anyone eat that when they could have a proper American meal? So Rachel had stopped ordering it, even though she loved it, because it was easier not to fight about it. Rachel pulled out her phone and found the number for her favorite Chinese restaurant. the one she had not called in nearly 5 years. She ordered enough food for 2 people, even though she was alone, because she wanted options. She wanted everything she had been denying herself: chicken fried rice, sweet and sour pork, spring rolls, egg drop soup. When the restaurant said it would be 45 minutes for delivery, Rachel said that was perfect. While she waited for the food, Rachel walked through the apartment, room by room. In the bedroom, she looked at the king-sized bed she shared with Jeffrey, the bed where she lay awake so many nights feeling lonely, even though he was right there beside her. She looked at his side of the closet, filled with his expensive suits and shoes. She looked at his dresser, covered with his cologne bottles and cufflinks and watch collection. He had not taken any of it with him. He thought he was coming back. He thought this was temporary. But Rachel knew it was not temporary. This was the end. She had finally said the things she should have said years ago, and there was no going back from that. And the strange thing was, she did not want to go back. Even with all the uncertainty that lay ahead, even with the fear of being alone, she did not want to go back to the way things were. The doorbell rang, and Rachel went to answer it. The delivery driver, a young man who looked barely 20, handed her the bags of food with a friendly smile. Rachel paid him, added a generous tip because it was the day before Thanksgiving, and he was working instead of being with his family, and carried the food into the kitchen. The smell alone was enough to make her mouth water. She did not bother with plates or proper place settings. She took everything directly to the living room, spread it out on the coffee table that had been her grandmother's, and sat down on the floor in front of it. She opened the containers one by one, steam rising from each one, filling the apartment with delicious smells. And then Rachel Perry, 40 years old, newly separated from her abusive husband, sat alone on the floor of her apartment on the night before Thanksgiving, and ate Chinese food with chopsticks, while silent tears of relief continued to roll down her face. She turned on the television and found a football game, not because she particularly cared about football, but because Jeffrey had never let her watch sports on TV. He said football was for men, and if she wanted to watch television, she should watch something appropriate for women, like cooking shows or romantic movies. So Rachel turned the volume up loud and watched men in uniforms run up and down a field, and she ate her sweet and sour pork, and she felt, for the first time in 5 years, completely and utterly free. Rachel woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure why the bed felt so empty, why the apartment was so quiet. And then the memories of the previous day came flooding back. The grocery store, the phone call, the confrontation, Jeffrey leaving. She sat up slowly, expecting to feel regret, or panic, or fear. But instead, she felt something unexpected: peace. She got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, still wearing the clothes she had fallen asleep in the night before. She had been too exhausted to change into pajamas, too emotionally drained to do anything but collapse onto the bed after finishing her Chinese food and watching 3 hours of football. The apartment was a mess. The empty food containers were still spread out on the coffee table. Jeffrey's jacket was still hanging on the coat rack by the door, forgotten in his angry exit. But Rachel did not care about the mess. She made herself a cup of coffee, strong and black the way she liked it, not weak and full of cream the way Jeffrey insisted it should be made. It was Thanksgiving morning. Outside, Rachel could hear the sounds of families preparing for the holiday. Doors opening and closing, cars starting, the smell of turkey already beginning to cook in other apartments. Rachel thought about what she would have been doing if yesterday had not happened. She would have been up since 6 in the morning, preparing the turkey, peeling potatoes, setting the table for 10 people. Charlotte would have arrived by 8, criticizing everything Rachel did. Jeffrey would have sat on the couch watching football while Rachel worked in the kitchen for hours. And at the end of it all, after serving everyone and cleaning up alone, someone would have complained that the turkey was too dry, or the stuffing was too bland, or the pie was not as good as the one Charlotte made last year. Rachel took her coffee to the living room window and looked out at the street below. A light snow had started to fall during the night, dusting everything with a thin layer of white. It was beautiful. Rachel could not remember the last time she had simply stood and looked at snow falling, appreciating its beauty without worrying about whether Jeffrey would complain about having to shovel the walk or whether Charlotte would criticize her for not having the sidewalk cleared before she arrived. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Rachel walked over and looked at the screen. 3 missed calls from Jeffrey, 5 text messages. She picked up the phone and read the messages, her coffee growing cold in her other hand. The first message, sent at 11:30 the night before. "Rachel, this is ridiculous. Call me so we can talk about this like adults." The second message, sent at midnight. "You are being childish. My mother is very upset. You owe her an apology." The third message, sent at 2 in the morning. "Fine. If you want to spend Thanksgiving alone, that is your choice. But do not come crying to me when you realize how stupid you are being." The fourth message, sent at 7 this morning. "Are you really going to throw away our marriage over one argument? Think about what you are doing." The fifth message, sent just 10 minutes ago. "Call me. We need to talk about this." Rachel set the phone down without responding. She knew exactly what Jeffrey was doing. He was cycling through his usual tactics: anger, guilt, dismissal, then back to false reasonableness. He thought if he just found the right approach, the right words, she would crack and come back to him the way she always had before. But something fundamental had shifted inside Rachel. The woman who would have read those messages yesterday morning and felt compelled to call him back, to apologize, to make everything okay. That woman was gone. Rachel poured her cold coffee down the sink and made a fresh cup. She took it back to the living room and sat down on the couch, tucking her legs underneath her. She thought about her grandmother Helen, about all the conversations they had had in this apartment over the years. Helen had never remarried after Rachel's grandfather died. She had raised Rachel alone, worked as a seamstress to support them both, and never once complained about how hard it was. When Rachel was a teenager, she had asked her grandmother why she never dated, never looked for another husband. "I was married once," Helen had said, sitting in this very living room, in the armchair that Rachel had later sold because Jeffrey said it was ugly and old-fashioned. "Your grandfather was a good man, and I loved him. But after he died, I realized something. I realized I liked being in charge of my own life. I liked making my own decisions without having to ask anyone's permission or worry about anyone's opinion. Some women need a partner to feel complete. I am not one of those women. And sweetheart, if you ever find yourself in a relationship that makes you feel small, that makes you doubt yourself, that makes you feel like you have to apologize for existing, then you walk away. Do you hear me? You walk away with your head held high, and you never look back." Rachel had been 17 when Helen said those words. She had nodded and agreed, thinking it was good advice, but never imagining she would need it. She thought she would be smart enough, strong enough, to avoid that kind of relationship. But emotional abuse was not always obvious. It crept in slowly, disguised as concern, masked as humor, hidden behind apologies and flowers and temporary kindness. By the time Rachel realized what was happening, she was already in too deep, already tangled up in Jeffrey's manipulation, already doubting her own perception of reality. But yesterday, standing in that grocery store, hearing Jeffrey's voice screaming at her through the phone while strangers stared, something in Rachel had finally snapped. Or maybe it had not snapped. Maybe it had woken up. Maybe the part of her that Helen had raised, the strong, independent part that knew her own worth, had finally fought its way back to the surface after being buried for 5 years. Rachel's phone buzzed again. Another message from Jeffrey. "My mother wants to talk to you. Call her." Rachel deleted the message without reading it twice. She deleted all of Jeffrey's messages, and then she did something she had never done before. She blocked his number. Her finger hovered over the button for a moment, and she felt a flutter of panic. What if he needed to reach her for something important? What if there was an emergency? But then she thought, what emergency could there possibly be that would require him to call her? They did not have children together. They did not share finances beyond the marriage itself. The apartment was hers alone. Jeffrey had his own phone, his own car, his own life. He did not need her. He had never needed her. He had just wanted someone to control, someone to serve him, someone to make him feel powerful. Rachel blocked his number and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She spent the rest of the morning cleaning the apartment. She threw away the empty Chinese food containers, washed the dishes, vacuumed the living room. She took Jeffrey's jacket from the coat rack and folded it neatly, placing it in a box along with a few other items he had left behind. His toothbrush in the bathroom, his slippers by the bed, his favorite coffee mug that said "World's Best Boss" that his construction team had given him last Christmas. Everything went into the box, and Rachel put the box by the door. If he wanted his things, he could come get them. But he would not be staying here ever again. By noon, the apartment was clean and quiet. Rachel stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at her space, her home. It felt different now, lighter, like a heavy fog had lifted, and she could finally see clearly. She thought about what to do for Thanksgiving dinner. She could order takeout again. She could make herself a simple meal, or she could do nothing at all. It was her choice. No one was going to criticize her. No one was going to demand anything from her. She was free to spend the day however she wanted. Rachel decided to take a walk. She put on her warmest coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and stepped out into the snowy afternoon. The streets were mostly quiet. Most people were inside with their families, gathered around tables laden with food, giving thanks for their blessings. Rachel walked slowly, letting the cold air fill her lungs, watching the snowflakes drift down from the gray sky. She passed houses with windows glowing warm and golden, and she could glimpse families inside, laughing and talking and eating together. For a moment, Rachel felt a pang of loneliness. She was 40 years old, spending Thanksgiving completely alone, walking through empty streets while everyone else was surrounded by loved ones. But then, she thought about what her Thanksgiving would have been like if she had not walked out of that grocery store yesterday. She would be in her apartment right now, exhausted and humiliated, serving people who did not appreciate her, listening to Charlotte's endless criticism, enduring Jeffrey's contempt. She would be with people, yes, but she would still be alone. More alone than she was right now, walking through the snow with only her thoughts for company. Rachel walked for over an hour, her feet carrying her through familiar streets, past the school where she taught, past the coffee shop where she had first met Jeffrey 7 years ago. She stood outside that coffee shop for a moment, looking through the window at the people inside. A young couple sat at a corner table, holding hands across the surface, looking at each other with obvious affection. Rachel remembered when she and Jeffrey had looked at each other that way, in those first few months before the mask slipped, before she saw who he really was underneath all the charm and polish. Had he ever really loved her? Rachel did not know. Maybe he had, in his own limited way. Or maybe he had just loved the idea of her, the idea of having a wife who was educated and respectable but also quiet and compliant. Maybe she had been more of an accessory to him than a partner, something to make him look good, to take care of his needs, to boost his ego. It did not matter now. Whatever he had felt, it had not been enough. It had not been real love. Real love did not involve constant criticism and humiliation. Real love did not make you feel small and worthless. Real love did not require you to lose yourself completely in order to keep the peace. Rachel turned away from the coffee shop and continued walking. She found herself heading toward the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. She had not visited in months. Jeffrey always said it was morbid to visit graves, that it was a waste of time to talk to dead people who could not hear you. But Rachel wanted to go now. She needed to go. The cemetery was peaceful, covered in a blanket of fresh snow. Rachel walked carefully along the paths, reading the names on the headstones as she passed. She found her grandmother's grave near the back, under a large oak tree that was now bare of leaves. The headstone was simple, just Helen Duncan's name and dates, and, underneath, the inscription that Rachel herself had chosen. A woman of strength and dignity. Rachel knelt down in the snow in front of the grave, not caring that the cold and wet soaked through her pants. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. "I am sorry I have not visited in so long. Jeffrey did not like me coming here, and I let him stop me. I let him stop me from doing a lot of things. But I am done letting him control my life. I did something yesterday, Grandma. I did something I should have done years ago. I stood up for myself. I used the words you taught me. I kept my head held high, and I walked away." Rachel felt tears building again, but she let them come. "I am scared," she admitted to the silent headstone. "I do not know what is going to happen next. I do not know if I did the right thing, but I know I could not keep living the way I was living. I was disappearing, Grandma. Little by little, day by day, I was losing myself. And yesterday, in that grocery store, I heard your voice so clearly. I heard you telling me to keep my head up, to never let anyone make me feel less than I am worth. And I finally listened." The wind rustled through the bare branches of the oak tree above. A bird called out somewhere in the distance. Rachel sat in the snow beside her grandmother's grave and felt, for the first time since Helen's death 3 years ago, truly connected to her again. Not through grief or loss, but through strength. Through the strength that Helen had tried so hard to instill in her. The strength that Rachel had finally found again. "Thank you," Rachel whispered. "Thank you for raising me to be strong, even though it took me a while to remember how. Thank you for leaving me this apartment, this place that is mine, where I can be safe and free. Thank you for everything, Grandma. I promise I will not waste the second chance I have been given. I promise I will live the kind of life that would make you proud." Rachel stayed at the grave for a long time, sitting in the cold, letting herself feel everything. The grief for the years she had lost, the anger at Jeffrey for how he had treated her, the fear of the unknown future that stretched ahead, but also hope, fragile and tentative, but real. Hope that maybe, just maybe, her life could be different now, better, truly hers. Finally, when the cold became too much and her legs were numb from kneeling, Rachel stood up. She brushed the snow from her pants and looked down at the headstone one more time. "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma," she said. "I will come visit again soon. I promise." Rachel walked back through the cemetery, through the snowy streets, back to her apartment. When she climbed the stairs and unlocked her door, she half expected to find Jeffrey waiting inside, ready to continue yesterday's argument. But the apartment was empty, exactly as she had left it. The box of his belongings still sat by the door. The living room was clean and quiet. Rachel hung up her coat, took off her wet shoes, and walked to the kitchen. She was hungry, she realized. She had not eaten anything all day except coffee. Rachel opened the refrigerator and looked at the meager contents. Eggs, bread, some cheese. Not exactly a Thanksgiving feast, but it would do. She made herself scrambled eggs and toast, simple and comforting, and ate standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the snow that continued to fall. After eating, Rachel went to the bedroom. She looked at the bed she had shared with Jeffrey for 5 years and made a decision. She stripped off all the bedding, every sheet and pillowcase and blanket, and stuffed it all into a large garbage bag. Then she went to the closet where she kept the spare linens, the set that had belonged to her grandmother, soft and worn from years of use. She had never used them before because Jeffrey said they were old and shabby and not suitable for guests. But there were no guests here now, just Rachel. She put the fresh sheets on the bed, and they smelled like lavender and memories and home. That night, Rachel Perry climbed into bed alone for the first time in 5 years, in a bed that smelled like her grandmother's house, in an apartment that was completely and totally hers, and she fell asleep, feeling something she had not felt in so long. Safe. She dreamed of her grandmother that night. In the dream, Helen was young again, standing in the kitchen of the apartment, teaching Rachel how to make pie crust. "The secret," Helen said in the dream, her hands covered in flour, "is to handle it gently but confidently. You cannot be afraid of it. You have to know what you want and go after it without hesitation." And Rachel, watching her grandmother's hands work the dough, understood that they were not really talking about pie at all. Rachel woke on the Friday morning after Thanksgiving to the sound of her phone ringing. She had forgotten to put it on silent the night before, and the shrill sound cut through the peaceful quiet of the apartment. She reached for it groggily, blinking at the bright screen. It was a number she did not recognize, but the area code was local. For a moment, she considered not answering, but something made her pick up. "Hello?" Her voice was rough with sleep. "Rachel Perry?" The voice on the other end was female, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is Rachel. My name is Margaret Chen. I am a divorce attorney here in town. I received your contact information from a colleague who thought you might need my services. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Rachel sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. A divorce attorney? Of course. She would need one. The thought had been hovering in the back of her mind since Wednesday evening, but she had not yet let herself fully confront it. Ending her marriage to Jeffrey would not be as simple as throwing him out and changing the locks. There would be paperwork, legal processes, decisions to be made. "Yes," Rachel said, her heart beating faster. "Yes, I have time to talk." They spoke for nearly an hour. Margaret had a kind voice, but asked direct questions. How long had Rachel been married? Did they have children? Did they own property together? Were there shared bank accounts? Rachel answered each question, and with each answer, she felt the reality of her situation becoming more concrete. She was not just angry at Jeffrey. She was leaving him. Actually, legally, permanently leaving him. When Margaret asked about abuse, Rachel hesitated. "He never hit me," she said quietly. "That is not what I asked," Margaret replied gently. "I asked if there was abuse." And Rachel, sitting alone in her bedroom on a Friday morning, finally said the words out loud. "Yes, emotional abuse. For 5 years. He called me names, degraded me. His mother was part of it too. They made me feel worthless. That is abuse," Margaret said firmly. "And it matters. Now, tell me about your assets." Rachel explained about the apartment, how it had belonged to her grandmother, how it had been left to her as separate property, not marital property. Margaret made approving sounds. "That is good," she said. "Very good. That means he has no claim to it. What about his assets?" "I do not know much about his finances," Rachel admitted. "He never shared that information with me. He said it was not my concern. But he makes good money as a construction manager. He has savings, investments, a retirement account. I know he owns some rental properties with his brother, but I do not know the details." "We will find out the details," Margaret said. "In a divorce, all marital assets must be disclosed. He will not be able to hide anything from us. Now, are you sure you want to do this? Once we file the paperwork, there is no going back. Your husband will be served with divorce papers, and the process will begin." Rachel thought about Wednesday night, standing in her apartment, telling Jeffrey to leave. The look of shock on his face when she refused to back down. The feeling of power and freedom that had flooded through her when she finally stood up for herself. She thought about Thanksgiving Day, spent alone, but peaceful. She thought about visiting her grandmother's grave, making promises about living a life that would make Helen proud. "I am sure," Rachel said. "I want to do this." "Good," Margaret said. "I am going to send you some paperwork to fill out. Basic information, financial details, everything you can remember. Get it back to me by Monday, and I will have the divorce petition filed by Tuesday. The court will serve him the papers. After that, he will have 30 days to respond. Do you think he will contest the divorce? Rachel considered. Jeffrey's pride was enormous. He would not want people to know that his wife had left him, that he had lost control of his marriage. But would he actually fight the divorce itself? She did not think so. He would be angry, certainly. He would try to make the process difficult. But ultimately, Jeffrey cared more about his image than about actually being married to her. If the marriage was over, he would want it to be on his terms, with his narrative. He would probably tell everyone that he was the one who left, that Rachel had been impossible to live with, that he was better off without her. I do not think he will contest it, Rachel said, but I think he will try to drag it out, make it difficult. He will want to punish me for leaving. Let him try, Margaret said, and Rachel could hear the smile in her voice. I have dealt with men like your husband before. They are bullies who rely on intimidation. Once they realize that will not work anymore, they usually back down. We will get you through this, Rachel. I promise. After they hung up, Rachel sat on her bed for a long time, staring at the wall. She was really doing this. She was divorcing Jeffrey, ending their marriage, starting over at 40 years old. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She spent the rest of Friday filling out the paperwork Margaret had emailed her. It was tedious work, requiring her to remember details she had tried to forget. The date they got married, their wedding location, his full legal name, his date of birth, his social security number. Some of the information she had to search for, digging through old documents and files. As she worked, Rachel realized how little she actually knew about Jeffrey's life. He had kept so much separate from her, compartmentalized, hidden. She had been his wife, but she had never been his partner. Not really. On Saturday morning, Rachel went to the hardware store and bought new locks for her apartment. She had thought about hiring someone to install them, but decided to do it herself. She wanted to be the one to secure her own home, to make it truly safe. The process took longer than she expected. She had never installed locks before, and she had to watch several video tutorials on her phone to figure out how to do it properly. But by early afternoon, both the front door and the deadbolt had new locks, and Rachel was the only person with keys. She stood in her apartment, looking at the shiny new hardware on her door, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was hers, this space, this home, this life. Jeffrey could not walk in anymore. Charlotte could not show up unannounced. Rachel was in control now. That evening, Rachel's phone rang again. This time, she recognized the number. It was Linda Morrison, her colleague from school. Rachel and Linda had been friendly before Rachel got married, often eating lunch together, sometimes going out for drinks on Friday evenings. But over the past 5 years, their friendship had faded. Jeffrey had not liked Linda. He said she was nosy, too opinionated, a bad influence. So Rachel had slowly pulled away, making excuses when Linda invited her out, keeping their interactions limited to school hours. Rachel hesitated before answering. She had not spoken to Linda in months, except for brief professional exchanges at work. What would she say? How would she explain what had happened? Hello? Rachel answered cautiously. Rachel, finally! I have been trying to reach you all day. Are you okay? Linda's voice was urgent, concerned. I am fine, Rachel said, confused. Why? What happened? What happened? Rachel, everyone is talking about it. Jeffrey showed up at Nancy's house yesterday for Thanksgiving, and apparently he told everyone that you had some kind of mental breakdown. He said you abandoned Thanksgiving dinner, threw him and his family out of the apartment, and that he is very worried about your mental state. Nancy called me this morning to ask if I knew anything about it. Nancy Martinez, was another teacher at their school, someone Rachel knew casually but was not close to. Rachel felt her face flush with anger. Of course Jeffrey would spin the story, to make himself look like the concerned husband and her look like the unstable wife. That was exactly his style. That is not what happened, Rachel said, her voice tight. I did not think so, Linda replied. Jeffrey is a liar. I have always known he was a liar. Rachel, what really happened? And Rachel, sitting in her apartment with her new locks and her divorce papers waiting to be signed, told Linda everything. She told her about the phone call in the grocery store, about the years of emotional abuse, about Charlotte's constant criticism, about finally standing up for herself and ordering them all out. She told Linda about blocking Jeffrey's number, about hiring a divorce attorney, about changing the locks. She told her everything she had been holding inside for 5 years. Linda listened without interrupting. When Rachel finally finished, there was a long silence. Then Linda said, very quietly, I wish you had told me sooner. I wish I had known what you were going through. I could have helped you. I was ashamed, Rachel admitted. I felt like I should have been able to handle it. I felt like it was my fault somehow, like if I could just be better, do better, then everything would be okay. That is what abusers do, Linda said firmly. They make you think it is your fault. They make you feel crazy and isolated. But Rachel, listen to me. None of this was your fault. You deserve so much better than how he treated you, and I am so proud of you for finally leaving. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. What do you need? Linda asked. How can I help? I do not know, Rachel said honestly. I am still figuring that out. Well, for starters, you are not spending the weekend alone. I am coming over. We are going to order pizza, drink wine, and you are going to tell me everything that narcissistic jerk did to you over the past 5 years, so I can be appropriately outraged on your behalf. Does that sound good? Rachel laughed, a real laugh, the first one she had had in days. That sounds perfect. Linda arrived an hour later with 2 bottles of wine, a box of pizza, and a bag full of chocolate. They sat on Rachel's couch, the same couch where Charlotte had sat with her feet on the coffee table just 3 days earlier, and they talked for hours. Rachel told Linda stories she had never told anyone. About the time Jeffrey threw her birthday cake in the trash because he said she had bought the wrong flavor. About the Christmas when Charlotte criticized every single gift Rachel had carefully chosen for the family. About the evening Jeffrey locked her out of the apartment for 2 hours because she had dared to disagree with him in front of his co-workers. He is a monster, Linda said, her face flushed with anger and wine. An absolute monster. And his mother is even worse. Rachel, I am serious. If you need a place to stay, if you ever feel unsafe, you come to my house. Anytime, day or night. I mean that. Thank you, Rachel said, but I think I am safe now. He does not have keys anymore. And honestly, I do not think Jeffrey would actually hurt me physically. His abuse was always emotional, psychological. He liked making me feel small, but he was always careful not to leave marks that anyone could see. That is still abuse, Linda insisted. Do not minimize what he did to you. I am not, Rachel said. Not anymore. For years, I told myself it was not that bad, that other people had it worse, that I should be grateful he did not hit me. But I see it clearly now. What he did was abuse, and I am done making excuses for him. They talked until past midnight. By the time Linda left, Rachel felt lighter than she had in years. She was not alone. She had a friend who knew the truth, who believed her, who supported her. Jeffrey had isolated her from her friends, made her feel like she had no one to turn to. But that had been another lie. Linda was here, and Rachel was beginning to realize that there might be other people willing to support her too, if she just let them in. On Sunday, Rachel went back to work on the divorce paperwork. She filled out every form, gathered every document, compiled everything Margaret had requested. It took most of the day, but by evening, everything was ready. She sent it all to Margaret via email, and then sat back and stared at her computer screen. It was done. The wheels were in motion. There was no going back now. Monday morning came, and Rachel had to return to work. She had not been back to school since the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. She was nervous about facing her colleagues, about the gossip that Jeffrey had undoubtedly started. But she got up, got dressed in her favorite blue dress that Jeffrey had always said was too bright and unprofessional, and drove to school with her head held high. The moment she walked into the teacher's lounge, several heads turned. Rachel could feel the curiosity, the speculation. But before anyone could say anything, Linda appeared at her side. "Good morning, Rachel," Linda said loudly, linking her arm through Rachel's. "I am so glad you are back. We missed you on Friday. Did you have a good long weekend?" Rachel understood what Linda was doing. She was making it clear that Rachel had an ally, that any gossip or judgment would have to go through her first. Rachel squeezed Linda's arm gratefully. "I had a very good weekend," Rachel said clearly. "Very productive. Thank you for asking." The day passed more easily than Rachel had expected. She threw herself into her work, focusing on her students, on lesson plans, on grading papers. Teaching had always been her sanctuary, the one place where she felt competent and valued. Her students did not care about her personal life. They just wanted her to help them learn to read, to understand math problems, to feel safe and supported in her classroom. And that was something Rachel knew how to do. During her lunch break, Rachel received an email from Margaret. The divorce papers had been filed. Jeffrey would be served within the next few days. Margaret warned her that he would probably try to contact her when he received the papers, and advised Rachel to not engage with him directly. Any communication should go through the attorneys. Rachel read the email twice, feeling her pulse quicken. This was really happening. In a few days, Jeffrey would know that she was serious, that this was not just a temporary separation or a dramatic gesture. She was ending their marriage, legally, officially, permanently. That evening, Rachel did something she had not done in years. She called her old college roommate, Patricia, who lived across the country in Seattle. They had been close once, talking on the phone every week, visiting each other when they could. But, over the past 5 years, those calls had become less frequent, then stopped altogether. Jeffrey had always complained when Rachel spent time on the phone with Patricia. He said it was rude to ignore him to talk to someone who lived so far away, so Rachel had let that friendship fade too, adding it to the long list of things she had sacrificed to keep the peace in her marriage. Rachel dialed Patricia's number, half expecting it to be disconnected, not sure Patricia would even answer a call from her after so much silence. But Patricia picked up on the third ring. "Rachel? Oh my God. Rachel, is that really you?" And for the third time in 4 days, Rachel told her story. She explained about Jeffrey, about the abuse, about finally leaving. Patricia listened, and when Rachel finished, Patricia said, "I never liked that guy. I tried to tell you at your wedding, but you seemed so happy, and I did not want to ruin it. But there was something off about him. Something that did not feel right. I am so glad you got out, Rachel. I am so glad you found the courage to leave." They talked for 2 hours, catching up on 5 years of lost time. Patricia was divorced too, Rachel learned. She had married a man who turned out to be an alcoholic, and after 3 years of trying to fix him, she had finally left. "It is hard," Patricia said. "Starting over is scary. But you know what is scarier? Staying in a situation that is slowly destroying you. You did the right thing, Rachel. You absolutely did the right thing." By the time Rachel went to bed that night, she felt surrounded by support. Linda, Patricia, Margaret, her attorney, even her students, in their own innocent way, had been a source of strength that day. Jeffrey had tried to isolate her, tried to make her believe she had no one. But he had been wrong. On Tuesday morning, Rachel was getting ready for work when her phone rang. It was Margaret. "He has been served," Margaret said without preamble. "The process server found him at his office this morning and delivered the papers. I wanted to give you a heads up in case he tries to contact you." "Thank you," Rachel said, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned her blouse. "What happens now?" "Now we wait. He has 30 days to file a response. My guess is that his attorney will reach out to me within the next week or so to try to negotiate terms. The good news is, since you do not have children and your apartment is separate property, this should be relatively straightforward. The main issues will be division of any joint assets and possibly alimony, though given that you both have incomes and the marriage was relatively short, I do not anticipate alimony being a major factor." After hanging up with Margaret, Rachel finished getting ready for work. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same face, same body, but somehow she looked different. Her eyes were clearer. Her shoulders were straighter. She looked, she realized, like someone who had just set down a burden she had been carrying for far too long. Rachel drove to school, taught her classes, ate lunch with Linda, graded papers during her prep period. It was a normal day, an ordinary day. But underneath the normalcy, Rachel could feel the tension building. Jeffrey had the papers now. He knew she was serious. The question was not if he would react, but when and how. The answer came at 4:30 that afternoon, just as Rachel was packing up her classroom to go home. Her phone rang, and she saw Jeffrey's name on the screen. She had forgotten to block his new number, the one from his office. For a moment, Rachel considered not answering. Margaret had told her not to engage, but something made her pick up. "Rachel!" Jeffrey's voice was cold, controlled, dangerous. "We need to talk." "No," Rachel said calmly. "We do not. You can talk to my attorney." "This is insane," Jeffrey said, and she could hear the anger building beneath his controlled tone. "Divorce? You are filing for divorce over one argument? Are you really that unstable?" "It was not one argument," Rachel said. "It was 5 years of abuse." "Abuse?" Jeffrey laughed, but it was not a real laugh. It was harsh, mocking. "Is that what you are calling it now? I tried to make you a better person, Rachel. I tried to help you improve yourself. And this is how you repay me? By humiliating me, by filing divorce papers and having them served at my workplace, where everyone could see?" "Goodbye, Jeffrey," Rachel said. "Do not you dare hang up on me. We are not done talking. You owe me an explanation. You owe me a chance to fix this." "I do not owe you anything," Rachel said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice was. "Not anymore." And then, for the second time in less than a week, Rachel hung up on her husband. She immediately blocked his office number, just as she had blocked his cell phone. Her hands were shaking, and her heart was pounding, but she felt good, strong. She had faced him again, and she had not backed down. She had not apologized, or explained or tried to make him feel better. She had simply stated her truth and ended the conversation. Rachel gathered her things and walked out to the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful. Rachel stood for a moment, just looking at the sunset, breathing in the cold December air. And she thought about how many sunsets she had missed over the past 5 years because she had been too busy cooking Jeffrey's dinner, or cleaning the apartment to Charlotte's standards, or worrying about what she had done wrong that day. No more. From now on, Rachel promised herself, she would notice the sunsets. She would notice the beauty around her. She would live her life with her eyes open and her head held high, exactly the way her grandmother had taught her. The next 3 months passed in a blur of paperwork, attorney meetings, and slow, steady progress toward freedom. Jeffrey's lawyer had contacted Margaret within a week of him being served, just as Margaret had predicted. There were negotiations, back-and-forth discussions about assets and property division. Jeffrey tried to claim that he deserved half the value of the apartment, arguing that he had contributed to its upkeep during their marriage. Margaret shut that argument down immediately, with documentation proving the apartment was separate property, inherited and never commingled with marital assets. Rachel went to work every day, taught her classes, graded papers, attended faculty meetings. On the surface, her life looked ordinary, unchanged. But underneath, everything was different. She was different. She started going to therapy, working with a counselor who specialized in emotional abuse recovery. In those sessions, Rachel began to understand the patterns of manipulation she had been trapped in, began to see how Jeffrey had systematically broken down her self-esteem and isolated her from support systems. Understanding it did not make it hurt less, but it helped her stop blaming herself. Linda became a constant presence in Rachel's life again, the friendship they had once shared rebuilding itself stronger than before. They started a tradition of Friday evening dinners, taking turns cooking at each other's apartments. Patricia called every Sunday morning from Seattle, and slowly, Rachel began reconnecting with other friends she had lost touch with over the years. Each reconnection felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that she had given away. January turned into February. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Jeffrey tried various tactics to delay or complicate things, but Margaret handled each attempt with professional efficiency. He claimed Rachel had hidden assets. Margaret provided documentation proving she had not. He demanded she pay half his legal fees. Margaret pointed out that he made significantly more money than Rachel, and that his demands were unreasonable. He tried to paint Rachel as mentally unstable, citing her breakdown on the day before Thanksgiving. Margaret had Rachel's therapist provide a statement confirming Rachel was perfectly stable, and that her decision to leave an abusive marriage was a sign of mental health, not instability. Through it all, Rachel stood firm. There were moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she had made the right choice, moments when the loneliness felt overwhelming. But then she would remember that phone call in the grocery store, remember the humiliation of being screamed at in public, remember the 5 years of walking on eggshells in her own home. And she would know, with absolute certainty, that she had made the only choice she could live with. In March, something unexpected happened. Rachel was called into the principal's office one afternoon after school. She walked in nervously, wondering if somehow her personal situation had affected her professional life, if there had been complaints about her work. But Principal Davis was smiling when she gestured for Rachel to sit down. "Rachel, I wanted to talk to you about an opportunity," Principal Davis said. "As you know, Susan Reynolds is retiring at the end of this school year. That leaves the position of assistant principal open. I have been watching your work carefully over the past few years, and I believe you would be excellent for this role. I know you were offered a similar position at another school 2 years ago and turned it down. I am hoping circumstances have changed, and you might be interested in accepting this time." Rachel sat very still, her mind racing. 2 years ago, when she was still married to Jeffrey, she had been offered a promotion to vice principal at a school across town. It had been a significant step up in responsibility and salary. But Jeffrey had been furious when she told him about it. He said the new position would require too much of her time, that she would be neglecting her duties as a wife, that she was being selfish and ambitious in ways that were not attractive. He had pressured her relentlessly until she turned down the offer. And Rachel, still caught in the cycle of trying to please him, had convinced herself that he was right, that her marriage was more important than her career. But Jeffrey was not here anymore. His opinion did not matter. This was Rachel's decision to make, and hers alone. "Yes," Rachel said, and she felt a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, I am very interested. Thank you for thinking of me." Principal Davis beamed. "Wonderful! The position would start in September, at the beginning of the next school year. That gives us time to work through the transition. Congratulations, Rachel. You have earned this." Rachel walked out of the principal's office feeling like she was floating. Assistant principal, a promotion she had wanted for years, finally within her reach. She immediately called Linda, who shrieked with excitement and insisted they go out to celebrate that evening. Then she called Patricia, who said, "See? Look at what happens when you get that dead weight out of your life. You start flying." In April, the divorce was finalized. Rachel sat in the courtroom, her lawyer beside her, and listened as the judge reviewed the settlement agreement. The apartment remained Rachel's alone. Their joint bank account, which had contained very little since Jeffrey had kept most of his money in separate accounts Rachel had no access to, was split evenly. Rachel kept her car, her retirement account, her personal possessions. Jeffrey kept his truck, his rental properties with his brother, his investments. There was no alimony awarded to either party. The marriage was dissolved, officially and completely. "You are now legally divorced," the judge said, signing the final papers. "Good luck to you both." Rachel walked out of the courthouse at 41 years old, 6 months after that day in the grocery store, legally free. She stood on the courthouse steps in the April sunshine, breathing in the spring air, and she felt tears streaming down her face. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming joy. She had done it. She had escaped. She was free. That evening, Linda threw a small divorce party at her apartment. Just a handful of people, close friends, who had supported Rachel through everything. They ate cake that said, "Congratulations on your divorce," in bright pink frosting, drank champagne, and laughed until their sides ached. Rachel looked around at these people who loved her, who had stood by her, who had helped her remember who she was, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Speech!" someone called out, and everyone laughed and raised their glasses expectantly. Rachel stood up, feeling slightly self-conscious, but also empowered. "I just want to say thank you," she began. "Thank you for believing me when I told you what I had been through. Thank you for not judging me for staying as long as I did. Thank you for helping me find my way back to myself. 6 months ago, I was standing in a grocery store, being humiliated by someone who was supposed to love me, and I felt completely powerless. But then, I heard my grandmother's voice, reminding me to keep my head held high, and everything changed. I walked away from those groceries. I walked away from that marriage. I walked away from a life that was slowly destroying me. And I walked toward this, toward freedom, toward friends who actually care about me, toward a life that is truly mine. So thank you for being part of my new beginning." Everyone cheered and clinked glasses, and Rachel sat down feeling lighter than she had in years. She thought about her grandmother Helen, wished desperately that Helen could be here to see this moment, to see Rachel finally living the kind of life Helen had always wanted for her. But in a way, Helen was here. Her wisdom, her strength, her love, had guided Rachel through the darkest times. Helen's apartment had been Rachel's sanctuary. Helen's words had been Rachel's lifeline. Helen might be gone, but her legacy lived on in Rachel's courage. May brought warm weather and new beginnings. Rachel started preparing for her new role as assistant principal, working closely with Principal Davis to learn the responsibilities she would be taking on in September. She attended training sessions, read educational leadership books, felt her confidence growing with each passing day. The other teachers treated her with respect, even deference, now that they knew about her promotion. Rachel tried to stay humble, to remember that she was still learning, but she also allowed herself to feel proud. She had worked hard for this. She deserved it. One Saturday afternoon in late May, Rachel was cleaning out her bedroom closet when she found a box she had not opened in years. Inside were old photographs, cards, letters. She pulled out a stack of photos and began looking through them. There she was as a child, sitting on her grandmother's lap, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. There she was as a teenager, awkward and shy, standing next to Helen at her high school graduation. There she was at 22, the day she got her teaching certificate, Helen beaming with pride beside her. And then there were the wedding photos. Rachel almost put them away without looking, but something made her pause. She studied the pictures carefully. There she was in her wedding dress, smiling at the camera, standing next to Jeffrey in his suit. She looked happy in the photos, young and hopeful, and in love. But looking closely now, Rachel could see something else. She could see the tension in her shoulders, the uncertainty in her eyes behind the smile. Even then, on her wedding day, some part of her had known. Some part of her had sensed that this was not right, that this man was not who he pretended to be. But she had ignored that inner voice, overridden her own instincts, told herself she was being paranoid or ungrateful. Rachel gathered all the wedding photos and took them to the kitchen. She stood over the trash can, holding them for a moment. And then, one by one, she tore them in half and dropped them into the garbage. She was not that uncertain young woman anymore. She was not the person who ignored her own instincts to please someone else. She was Rachel Perry, 41 years old, assistant principal starting in September, survivor of emotional abuse, woman who had found the courage to walk away with her head held high. In June, Rachel did something she had been thinking about for months. She booked a plane ticket to Paris. She had always wanted to visit France, to see the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, and walk along the Seine River. But Jeffrey had refused to travel anywhere that was not an English-speaking country. He said foreign travel was pretentious and a waste of money. So Rachel had buried that dream, along with so many others. But now, with some money saved from no longer supporting Jeffrey's expensive tastes, Rachel booked a 10-day solo trip to Paris for July. When she told Linda about it, Linda squealed with excitement. When she told Patricia, Patricia said, "I am so proud of you. Send me 1,000,000 pictures." Rachel had never traveled internationally alone before. She was nervous about the language barrier, about navigating a foreign city, about eating in restaurants by herself. But she was also excited. This was hers, her adventure, her dream. No one could take it away from her or make her feel guilty for wanting it. July came, and Rachel boarded a plane to Paris. The flight was long, but she did not mind. She read an entire book, watched 2 movies, slept a little. When the plane began its descent, and she looked out the window to see Paris spreading out below her in the early morning light, Rachel felt her eyes fill with tears. She had done it. She was here. She was really here. The 10 days in Paris were magical. Rachel visited the Eiffel Tower and stood at the top looking out over the city. She spent hours in the Louvre, getting lost among the paintings and sculptures. She walked along the Seine at sunset, eating crepes from a street vendor. She sat in cafes drinking coffee and watching people pass by. She practiced her rusty high school French and laughed at her mistakes. She ate at restaurants alone and felt powerful instead of lonely. She took hundreds of photographs, not for anyone else, but just for herself to remember. On her last night in Paris, Rachel sat at a small bistro near her hotel, eating dinner and drinking wine. A couple at the next table was arguing in rapid French, their voices rising and falling. Rachel could not understand all the words, but she understood the tone. The woman was angry, hurt. The man was defensive, dismissive. Rachel watched them for a moment and then deliberately turned away. That was not her life anymore. She did not have to witness other people's dysfunction. She did not have to accept it as normal or inevitable. Rachel paid her bill, left a generous tip, and walked back to her hotel through the warm summer night. Tomorrow she would fly home. But she would return changed. She had proven to herself that she could do hard things, brave things. She could travel alone to a foreign country. She could end an abusive marriage. She could stand up for herself. She could keep her head held high, no matter what came. When Rachel returned home in August, tanned and refreshed and full of stories, she threw herself into preparing for her new role. She organized her new office, set up meetings with department heads, reviewed student files. The work was challenging but rewarding. She was good at it. She had forgotten how good it felt to be good at something, to use her intelligence and skills, to be valued for her contributions. September arrived, and Rachel officially became assistant principal. On her first day in the new role, she wore her favorite blue dress, the one Jeffrey had hated, and she stood in front of the school at morning assembly and introduced herself. The students looked up at her with curious, trusting faces. The teachers smiled at her with respect and encouragement. Principal Davis stood beside her, proud and supportive. "I am honored to serve in this role," Rachel told the assembled students and staff. "My goal is to help create an environment where every student feels safe, valued, and empowered to learn. Where every person in this building knows that they matter, that their voice counts, that they have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That is what I believe in. That is what I am committed to." As she spoke, Rachel thought about the girl she had been, the woman she had become, the person she was still becoming. She thought about her grandmother Helen, whose strength had carried Rachel through the darkest times. She thought about the moment in the grocery store 6 months earlier when she had finally heard Helen's voice clearly. "Never lower your head to anyone. A woman who respects herself keeps her head held high, no matter what comes." Rachel had lowered her head for 5 years. She had let Jeffrey and Charlotte make her feel small, worthless, invisible, but she had raised her head again. She had fought her way back to herself, and she was never going back. After the assembly, Rachel went to her office and closed the door. She sat at her desk, in her new chair, in her new role, in her new life. On the desk was a framed photograph of her grandmother that she had brought from home. Rachel picked it up and looked at Helen's face, at the strength and dignity in her grandmother's expression. "I did it, Grandma," Rachel whispered. "I kept my head up. I walked away, and I am okay. More than okay. I am happy. I am free. I am exactly who you raised me to be." Rachel set the photograph back on the desk, where she could see it every day. A constant reminder of where she came from, of the strength that ran in her blood, of the woman who had loved her enough to teach her that she deserved better. That evening, Rachel went home to her apartment, the apartment that had been Helen's, the apartment that was now completely and truly hers. She made herself dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The apartment was quiet, but it was not lonely. It was peaceful, safe, hers. Rachel thought about everything that had changed in the past 10 months. She had ended her marriage. She had gotten a divorce. She had been promoted. She had traveled to Paris alone. She had reconnected with old friends and made new ones. She had started therapy and was healing from years of emotional abuse. She had reclaimed her life, piece by piece, day by day. But the most important thing she had done, the thing that made all the other changes possible, was that moment in the grocery store. That moment when she heard her grandmother's voice and decided to listen. That moment when she put down the shopping baskets and walked away with empty hands, but a head held high. That moment when she chose herself, her dignity, her freedom over a man who would never value her. Rachel raised her wine glass toward the photograph of her grandmother that she had brought home from her office. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for everything you taught me. Thank you for the strength you gave me. Thank you for this apartment, this sanctuary. Thank you for raising me to know my own worth, even when I forgot it for a while. I promise I will never forget again." The sun set completely, and the apartment grew dark. Rachel turned on a lamp, bathed in its warm glow. Tomorrow she would go back to work. She would face new challenges, solve new problems, help new students. Her life would continue, day by day, moment by moment. But she would face it all with her head held high, the way Helen had taught her, the way she should have been living all along. Rachel Perry was 41 years old. She was divorced, promoted, traveling, healing, growing, living. She was surrounded by friends who loved her, doing work that mattered, living in a home that was truly hers. She had survived 5 years of emotional abuse and 6 months of divorce proceedings. She had walked away from a man who tried to make her small and had reclaimed the woman she was always meant to be. And every single day, she woke up grateful that she had heard her grandmother's voice that day in the grocery store, grateful that she had found the courage to walk away, grateful that she had given herself the chance at a new life, a better life, a life lived with dignity and self-respect, and her head held high. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the years she had lost, but the life she had reclaimed. Not the mistakes she had made, but the courage she had found. Not the abuse she had endured, but the strength she had discovered within herself to say, enough, and mean it. Rachel thought about all the women out there trapped in situations like the one she had escaped. Women who were being told they were worthless, incompetent, crazy. Women who were being isolated from friends and family. Women who were walking on eggshells in their own homes. And she wanted to tell them what she had learned. You deserve better. You are worth more. And no matter how long you have stayed, no matter how much you have invested, you have the right to walk away. You have the right to choose yourself. You have the right to keep your head held high. Because a woman who respects herself never lowers her head for anyone. Not for a husband who demeans her, not for a mother-in-law who criticizes her, not for anyone. A woman who respects herself knows her own worth and refuses to accept less than she deserves. Rachel was that woman now, and she would never be anything else again. She finished her wine, washed the glass, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to live fully and freely. But tonight, Rachel Perry went to sleep in her own apartment, in her own bed, with her own dreams and her own future stretching out before her like an open road. And she slept peacefully, knowing that she had finally found her way home, not to a place, but to herself, to the woman Helen Duncan had raised her to be, to the woman she had always been, underneath all the abuse and manipulation and fear, to the woman who kept her head held high no matter what came. That woman was free, and freedom, Rachel had learned, was worth everything. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.